In today's episode,
Ocean's 11 cyber version.
It's hunting season.
Because the cloud has something that it brings with it.
And we're going hunting for threats online.
Question is a science on its own, right?
And this takes us to a Splunk commercial who's sponsoring this episode. No.
Welcome to Cisco Tech Stories. A podcast with real-life stories from real-life engineers. Your hosts are Nicholas and Tristan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast, a podcast where Nico and I listen to fantastic stories from Cisco engineers from all around the globe. Hello, Nico.
Hello, Tristan. I'm really excited for today's episode. I think we have a quite unique guest.
Yes, indeed. But before we start the show, we have some updates. You know that we started this show like 1.5 years ago. And at the time, we were both technical leaders in Cisco EMEA TAC, you in the wireless space and me in the service provider space. Funnily enough, this is no longer the case. We both had some updates on this. And why don't you start with yours, Nico?
Yeah, let's start with the smaller one. So I'm now a principal engineer in Cisco CX, so still doing the same around wireless, but I now focus more on the future of Cisco Tech Enterprise, the consistency between all our worldwide teams, and the adoption and rollout of our innovation. So I'm going to spare you the Gen AI buzzword, but yeah, there's a bit of that as well.
Yes, indeed. And congrats for that, because it's a well-deserved promo. You worked a lot, and you definitely deserve it a lot. So congrats.
Thank you. What about you?
Yeah, so got some changes as well. So I decided to move my focus from service provider to cybersecurity. So it's quite a quite a big difference. So I'm now a forensics engineer for Cisco. I've always liked cybersecurity, especially from the capture the flag challenges that I watch a lot and I play a lot with those. For me, it's like being on an escape game, so it's quite exciting. And I got the opportunity to move to exactly that position at Cisco, so I like it a lot. So I'm now working on identifying vulnerabilities in Cisco products and working with internal and external teams whenever we find a compromised device to understand how a threat actor got in and make sure that we keep our product secure, basically.
Sounds like fun stuff.
It's very fun stuff. And talking about cybersecurity in today's episode, so let's welcome Jean Francois Dive, a former Cisco TAC security and routing switching engineer who is now a threat hunter for Cisco CCERT. Hello, Jeff.
Hello. Nice to be here. It's a new experience for me, so let's see what it gives.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about yourself. So how did you come into Cisco and what you did first before to do your actual role today?
Sure. So I'm one of those old timers at Cisco. I started way back when I was young and beautiful. Started in the TAC, worked there for about 10 years in total. Did quite a few different teams: network management, security, a large chunk, and service provider, routing and switching. Then as well, I always had a security background and security interest. And eventually, I went through Cisco IT, so internal IT, for a few years, and then I was hired by the CISO team, which does incident response and detection for Cisco, the company, right? So it's not about offering services, etc. It's really protecting the company itself.
And I love your job title because your job title is threat hunter, right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
what is a threat hunter?
Threat hunting investigator. So threat hunt is, cybersecurity have gone through a few phases of buzzwords as well. But essentially, what it comes down to is we are doing detection. And we have multiple teams doing multiple parts of the job. So we have analysts, we have detection engineering, which create the detection. Then we have investigators, as I'm part of the main investigation team that leads all of the large chunk investigations. But we spent a rather large amount of time to look for traces of problems, right? We kind of specialize in multiple topics, and we threat hunt. So we find a threat, we find what we call TTPs, for example, so techniques that the attackers are using, and we're trying to see if can we see that kind of techniques in our environment. So that's the hunting part. But as well, a large chunk of the work is really orchestrating the work done by the analysts that are handling all of the alerts that are generated by our SIM, and as I was saying, conduct large investigation when there is a need to, when we find something interesting, which is always the exciting part of the job, is when we find something interesting. I always like it. People sometimes are scared, but I like it.
And talking about something interesting, what are the stories that you have for us today?
So I'm going to talk about the two different stories that are highlighting some elements of the cybersecurity field from my point of view. So because you could look at it from the to the security architects, for example, that are deploying different protecting solutions. You can look in from different angle, from your angle that is looking at product security, bugs, etc. And from my side of the world, what I'm really interested is how are people getting in and using which techniques, and what can we do about it? How can we detect them? And even better, can we, avoid them to get in? Can we block them to get in? And to do that, I just picked a few of the relatively recent 2-3 years relatively famous compromise that happened to different companies, and maybe highlight the techniques that were used and how it relate to what we do, what kind of protection that we put in place, what kind of detection that we do, right? So one I wanted to start it was the MoveIt data breach. MoveIt was it's a large file transfer software that suffered the zero. So it's what we typically call enterprise software, right? So it's really dedicated solution, some boxes that you put on the internet where you put large files, and companies share large file through this mechanism, right? So it's a very dedicated large companies type of software. 0-day group found those ones, and they basically ransom the crap out of everybody that was having those boxes outside. Of course, it was a lot of interesting companies. And so what is it that we learned here is that, so in the term of technical detail, it was SQL injection. I don't think the vulnerability was very complicated, right? It was a 0-day, but it was actually a very niche piece of software. Somebody spent some time to look at it, and Tristan can probably relate. You find some niche software nobody really looked at, and then you don't need to poke at it, and then it crumbles, and you find some stuff in it. I think it's that kind of story that happened. So some SQL injection. The company suffered double extortion, so theft and then encryption, and then shaming on public. So what is it that we see here, and that is really a trend for a bunch of companies, Cisco included, is that large companies like Cisco have a ton of those applications that have been deployed, that are known or maybe sometimes forgotten, and that if a threat actor gets interested by those, it can usually get through, right through your door and right through everything, and maybe inside of the network. So it's one of the things that we are very cautious about, is that there will be some boxes that's going to get attackers inside. And relatively recently, I think in the trend for the very recent threat in 2024, it seemed that this year, the key factor on how large companies got compromised were through 0 days of those big boxes that are sitting outside. Not only here, file moving or file transfer, but it's definitely applicable to all of the VPN boxes and all sorts of Citrix and all of those externally facing boxes. So what does it mean for us? For us, detection is stay on top of the game, meaning that you have the knowing what you have, try to have a good map of the landscape of what our exposure. And we use a bunch of cool techniques like scanning and identification. We use a product that is called Run Zero, which is a great product, not made by Cisco. That is a super smart scanner. So we use that, and we are really up to date on when vulnerability information are released. We're trying to really map what's our exposure. We have an entire team dedicated just to do that. That's really cool. So I thought it was an interesting one. Another one that happened in 2023 as well is the MGM Resorts and Caesars Entertainment Group, basically the casinos in Las Vegas that got ransomware, and they paid $15 million as a ransom to recover their activity, which is probably not much for them, but it was a very successful hack. And people, it was a bit Ocean's 11 cyber version, and they went away with some decent money out of it. And the way they did it were not super technical. It was phishing, so phishing by calling up the employees, pretending that you're the IT support or pretending that you're IT and managing through different calls left and right to manage to get an employee to reveal the password. They had MFA enabled, which is what everybody is recommending for everything. But and it's a very probably American more American typical problem is the MFA got bypassed through SIM-swap. So the vulnerability with SIM-swap is interesting on its own because they rely on the fact that you can send codes and reset codes for the MFA through SMS, and it's SIM swapping attacks, which is essentially somebody managed to take over your SIM card, buy a new SIM card, usually through either hacked service provider access, it's one way, or what's much more common is through somebody they pay for, right? Some vendor at a shop, things like that, that can do the porting of the phone number to a new SIM. That's how they get on. So, and with that, it allowed them to take over the MFA, the two-factor. They get in, and then they can,
I heard before that SIM swapping was leveraging, I would say, weak procedures in US mobile service providers, that anyone could just call in and say, I need to swap my SIM, and they were not verifying stuff too much. I guess that this has been fixed and improved since then. So you're saying now you can still possible, but through corruption and
I think it's always possible, right?
Yes.
But it's much more common in the US than I never heard of a successful SIM swap in Belgium or in France that I know of, right? That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but because it seems that the level of control is much harder, and then they will impose. I know in Belgium it might be an EU-wide regulation, is that you can't just give a phone number to anybody. You must register. There is this know your customer type of mandatory requirements, and so you must provide ID, provide your a copy of your ID card or something like that. So that probably makes the SIM swap piece a little bit harder. But by all means,
it's never bulletproof, but it makes it harder.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never bulletproof. But the US side, of course, they're very known to it, so they are all working on improving the situation. But I've seen this in a much more common way in the US. Yeah.
And I have a question on the ransom that got paid. Why do people pay? Because typically the malware where we hear is like, your hard drives got encrypted and then you didn't have a backup, so you need to be up and running, so you pay. The alternative is that you just format every system you have and you start from scratch. Then you can restore a backup or whatever. When do people pay, and why do they pay?
It's a good question. The reality is you have two aspects. Regardless of the situation, I mean, regardless of what happened, you're kind of it's a real problem. Even if if you pay or if you don't pay, you're gonna have problems, right? That's the first thing. Companies might have had a successful backup strategy, right? And the backup might have encrypted or not. Realistically, if you work on it and you set up a backup, you can make unmovable backups, etc. So there are technologies that allows you to have a backup that's going to resist to a full compromise of the company. But even if that happens, the cost, so that means if you fully encrypt the entire company, AD, infrastructure, identity, and all the servers, etc., at the scale they operate, the time it's going to take you to rebuild something is going to take a lot of time. And then you, as you said, you need to usually you're going to actually have to buy new hardware, deploy it, reinstall, reinstall from scratch, etc., etc. Or you're going to have to restore the servers, and usually it's going to be a part of it. The reality is that of all the machines that get encrypted, the systems that are used by the attackers, the threat actors, are not always foolproof. So sometimes they encrypt, they lose the key, doesn't really work. The people, because we can talk a little bit about who's behind those things, they are not always super technical savvy, so they might make mistakes as well. All of that to say that it's not even because you pay that you're gonna really guarantee that you're gonna restore everything. Very likely not everything, but what's going to be the percentage of what's going to be restored. So if you take that into account, and the business that you're in, how long is it going to be that you're going to be fully down, and the impact there's going to be, businesses make the decision that they pay. I don't know the specific of the MGM, etc., but casino chain with multiple casinos being asked $15 million or stopping to make money for weeks. I have the feeling that financially, it's a very straightforward decision. Now, there's not only the financial impact, there is the legal aspect. There are multiple aspects on how they make the decision. But from what I've seen, and I've seen around, there's not that many companies paying. In what I've been in relation to close, I've not seen that many payments. But
people don't want to negotiate with terrorists. That's the usual line. But then if the ransom is smaller than what you would pay to restore, I guess it's tempting to just pay and say, okay, we'll do better next time. We'll protect better, but this time, we just let it go.
It depends which organization. I mean, if you're encrypting some public sector stuff, it's a lot harder to pay. If it's a private company, then it's different people that's going to make the decision to pay. Then how do you organize the payment? Then typically, it's not going to be your company straight that's going to pay it. Usually, they will go through some external companies that are going to do the dealing. So it's a multiple angle to those decisions.
Must have been a tough incident call, that one.
Yeah. Probably the people there. It's but the Talos guys in Cisco. But maybe we'll talk a bit later about the roles of what everybody does. They help customers dealing with those situations. So it's an interesting one. So that's the phishing, which is essentially the SIM swap. We talked about it. So then, that one I really like it. So the couple next one I really like them because they're really close to the heart and close to what we typically see. Okta security breach 2023. Attacker stole HTTP access token, and through this they managed to gain access to an Okta dashboard. So basically, people, and it's happening inside Cisco relatively regularly, is that you lose not credentials, but you lose session tokens. Session tokens or some form of session token is gonna get leaked, and those leaks happen, super easily through backups, through small software solution like what's the name again? There is when you want to test your API, your API endpoint, which is public by default, and you put your credential in there. Postman. There you go.
Oh, Postman. Yeah.
Yes. So if you can rewind the Postman. So for a super typical loss of API cookies would be through Postman. People use Postman to test the API that they are working on. They put the credential in there, except that the profile are usually public by default, or they have been for a long time. So people are just harvesting Postman to look for credentials, to look for cookies. And just using the cookies can lead to the full compromise of the thing that you were managing on, because people don't pay attention. It's exactly the same. So it's those temporary credentials sometimes are valid for a long time, depending on the type of authenticated session that you have. It can go up to 30 days of validity. So there is really a time frame in which you can lose the data. So it seems that through the Okta security breach, it was the session to access the Okta console with a power user, essentially. So I thought, and again, this is a very typical and classic leak of information. Another thing that we see regularly are laptops that are getting compromised and credentials are harvested, but not only the credentials, but the cookies that are generated and stored in the browser are harvested as well. And there is a potential of cookie reuse, and people can just logging in. They just reuse the cookies and they're already logged in. They already have the full access of what the user had. And for the detection for us, it's an actual challenge, because when you see a session that has been authenticated and has been accessed through some specific laptop IPs, etc., and then suddenly it shows from another location, that might be an avenue for us to detect. But if you think about all of the systems that exist and that are authenticated, that you are authenticated, and then look at all the logs that's going to allow you to do that detection at scale, it's a very complicated business. So it's not easy to detect all those things, and it's a pretty efficient way to get through. So a very common and very up-to-date technique that is still being used very much. Another one that I thought was interesting is Microsoft themselves, where in 2023 they exposed some data, and an AI researcher accidentally exposed 38 terabytes of data simply because he misconfigured an Azure blob, which is a blob of data, some it's like S3 in AWS. They misconfigured the properties and it became public. And then you have a whole truckload of data. Some actors are just spending their time looking for publicly accessible or reference of those buckets or those store of data. Once they find one, they're just gonna go as fast as possible to download them, and then find the goods in there. So there is a whole sport, a whole series of software that you can even find that are gonna help you to find credentials, token, and everything that we talked about before to get access to other stuff. And it goes as fast as just sharing. Usually they're gonna share it public, just maybe to copy the file, and then they copy the file and forgot to set it back non-public. Things as dumb as that, and the consequences are huge.
It happens so easily. I got some exposure to that in the sense that I created a S3 bucket in Amazon, and I didn't do the tagging part properly. And immediately, like in a few hours, I got an alert from IT that, hey, you have this, we detected, So Cisco IT was on me like immediately. Luckily,
Yeah.
it was just a test for a lab device, so nothing bad at all. But I could see that, okay, we're not joking with this. So it's
No, we're not.
to keep track, because it's going to happen. People are going to mistag stuff. It's obvious.
Absolutely. And it's a bit of a technological chit chat, which is interesting. There is when I mean InfoSec and IT, we can do this because the cloud has something that it brings with it that is huge, and we don't have for the rest of the world, is that we have an inventory that is up to date, for which you have API that you can have access. And so you can make checks, right? You can automate a truckload of checks of is your action of creating the S3, putting it public. We have stuff that is, parsing constantly logs and goes through all of the resources, rediscover all of the resources in all of the accounts that is owned by Cisco to look for that kind of problem. But if you think about it, in a company as large as us that has a giant footprint, millions of devices and IPs, etc., that are live all the time, it is impossible to keep an actual up-to-date inventory of what you have. Because it's already challenging if you force everybody with a military mind to register everything, to be 100% consistent in what they do when they register and deploy stuff. The pace at which people are deploying, destroying, and renewing and changing resources inside such a large network means that your network changes constantly. It's never what it was the minute before. So how do you actually look at the content of it and analyze its security, like we do for the S3 bucket that we were mentioning? So it's a big challenge for the legacy, like non-cloud environment, that at least the cloud brought this great piece, which is the actual inventory and all of the API and all of the accesses that we need to be able to query it. So I think that's a very nice property, and we're using it, as you saw. So yeah, so it does happen to, and so for example, in the previous example of the exposed file sharing appliance, if that file sharing appliance was deployed in the cloud, you will find it much faster than if you had it in a classical network. If you don't spend a lot of energy and time to scan for it and identify it.
It's a bit counterintuitive when you think about it, because you would think, okay, this is my own network. It's much easier for me to control and see what's inside it. But what you're saying is that it's actually much easier when it's a cloud provider, because it has APIs, because you can control it much easier than.
Absolutely, but that's because you always live in a world of technical debt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big difference when I was in the tech compared to seeing an actual live big production network is. When you're in the tech or when you're in services, you only see idealized environment. When you recommend what should be done, or as an architect, you try to recommend this idealized vision of what should be, right? But the customers and all of the companies, they have to drag everything that exists along, change it slowly but surely, and there is never a greenfield deployment, or very rarely, right? And so dragging this technical debt mean that you drag some unknowns that goes with it. And if you take something large enough, it's going to be very difficult to keep track of all of the bits that are there.
Makes sense. So with this legacy that you're dragging with you, and this is why you end up with seeing customers or whatever that have devices that are end of life for like 10 years and still using it.
Absolutely.
Renew
Absolutely.
at once. Yeah, for sure.
It's a responsibility, right? Because you can say, I'm going to keep, I don't want to do cloud. I'm going to keep it in my own network, but that puts the responsibility of the whole security and everything on your shoulders. Like, you have to do it better than the cloud does.
But I think regardless,
you have a responsibility, right?
Yeah, regardless of where it is, if it's in the cloud or if it's in your own, if in your environment, responsibility is going to be shared anyway. So you will always have a part of responsibility in the security of that environment, in the cloud or inside. It's just that you have the responsibility is bigger when you own everything. That here you have sub-rented a part of it, and you can kind of admit you can forget about the security of the VM if you use a platform as a service and you just run container, right? You're not going to think about the compute security, but you're just going to think about the security of your container, not the thing under it, right? So you kind of have this abstraction layer into a response.
It reduces the surface, yeah.
It reduces the surface, absolutely. So the Internet Archive got DDoSed this year in 2024. Botnets and so basically they DDoSed the Internet Archive, and at the same time exploited a few vulnerabilities to exfiltrate a bunch of data. So they go undercover through the DDoS, and at the same time they hide it to do something more nefarious. And I like that piece of the story because there's something that it's a trend that we've seen, which is not fully explained yet, but we receive regularly cases from some of our users where they get bombarded by subscribe and unsubscribe requests, but hundreds of them. So it's been automated. They get subscribed or attend to subscription to a bunch of stuff. And so their inbox gets filled with change the password of data, you've been added to this mailing list, can you confirm? And hundreds of those things. And maybe somewhere lost in the middle, there's going to be one email that is about how somebody is trying to change the email address of that such account, right? And they're going to try to hide this this activity that is actually happening into an ocean of through an ocean of emails and information. And I thought it's quite clever, but we do see that. We do see this happening on a regular basis.
That's interesting. what I cannot say I like that, but the Internet Archive, you would think, what's in there? It's only old web pages from 1997, old video games, but no, there's a lot of good stuff inside it. And the good thing and the bad thing with the archive is that it's an archive. So if you remove something from internet because you didn't want it to be seen, if it's being archived, then there's a chance it's still there, right?
Absolutely.
I have a new big question. How do you actually defend from a denial of service attack? Because if you get a storm of traffic, apart from blocking it, but then you're blocking kind of all traffic, how do you?
So it's again, good question. It's a science on its own, right? So DDoS protection is really so there is the easy answer, and then you can go a little bit deep in the technical aspect. But in terms of solution, you invest in a DDoS protection solution. You have Radware, Harbor, etc. Cisco, we have Harbor, which is really something that scrub the data and will. So you put that in line, it redirects the traffic through the scrubber. The scrubber is going to try to recognize the DDoS traffic and then remove a piece of that traffic. Realistically as well, if there's somebody really want to DOS you, they can just fill up your pipes because you have a limited amount of amount of pipe, and the DDoS capacity of the groups are usually bigger than that. So it's going to be an ongoing battle. It kind of counterbalanced as well with content with CDN networks, because, for example, Cisco.com is on a CDN, right? So even if you fill up fully the pipe to Cisco, Cisco.com is still going to be there. Now, the question is, having your page Cisco.com up is one aspect, but how are you going to do your, what does it mean for your, for the rest of your services? That's really depending on how those services are made and how you protect against them. Sometimes having a DDoS protection for services that where you own the full software stack, you might be more resilient by implementing DDoS protection in your software stack. Protocols, security protocol like IKE for VPN, etc., have DDoS protection inside the protocol, right? So implementing such solutions could be one story as well. It really depends on when and where the DDoS is being performed or against.
Okay. You hinted at it before. I don't want this episode to run forever. Like I like your stories, and you can come back if you want. But could you give us a landscape of the different types of security? Because what I'm exposed to is network device security. So you have like your VPN, your firewall. You have your application security with multi-factor, and you probably have device administration and logging, etc. Like locking the actual access to your device. But there's a lot more aspects, and you said you're part of one team at Cisco, but there's more teams. Can you give a bit of a landscape?
Sure. But so the teams are really matching on the responsibility of the different type of action, right? But security is not, because you were hinting at some security in some of the technologies. Realistically, there is a security component to everything that is IT related. You deploy a server, there is a security component. You deploy software, there is a security component. So you can't do computer stuff without the security component to it, right? Is it filled? You pay attention to it? Depends, but there is a security angle to all of those things. The way things are organized, at least inside Cisco, is in terms of team and who's looking at things. You have in IT, you have security teams that are looking at deploying things securely. They are looking at technologies that will be used to protect to protect Cisco, right? They're going to deploy technologies, firewalls, IDS, yadi blah blah, to filter ACL, etc. Closely working with them, you're going to have infosec architects that are going to look at that we are applying the right programs, etc. Then you have CSIRT, which responsibility is really to establish a detection strategy with the teams that are operating, right? Because you can't do that without the team that are operating, because they know how they are supposed to operate their environment. And we do, if there is an incident, we're going to do the response. So that's good. That's really the main CSIRT charter. When we talk about bugs and products, when there is a problem of security with products, it's going to be PSERT, which is the product security. The product security incident response team, which is really going to deal about everything that is related to a Cisco product or solution. They are much more customer focused, right? Because they're gonna answer customer questions, customer concern on security question, and they will deal with making sure that assessing even if things are vulnerable and making sure that those things get fixed. So that's another important team. Then there is the service that Cisco offers to customer, and that's Talos, which is really the security services with advanced services and the CX side of the house, which is what are the service for security that Cisco deliver to its customers, right? So you're going to have what we do, which is a detection and response for customers. There's going to have Talos as a incidents team with great people there that are doing that for the customers. That they get called when shit hit the fan, they don't know what to do. Customer calls them. They have the whole research, security research that Talos covers as well. But these are the main focus. Then there is, can't forget Tristan's corner, which is the ASIC group, which is essentially the people looking at doing a little bit of red teaming against the products, that are looking at forensic against the product, that are doing red teaming against infrastructure, because really when you deploy a solution that is sitting on the cloud and run through different layers, complicated stuff left and right, it's still a product, right? And you still need to red team those environments. So that's pretty much the at large the big landscape of where security is done at Cisco.
And I think Talos also kind of watches the internet, to identify threat actors, etc. It's not only the internal incident response, but they kind of check the overall internet traffic to keep an eye on where the stuff
they
comes
really have a security researcher, and the goal, really their goal is to bring knowledge and advanced research on current topics, right? They have a bunch of researchers that are super focused on a specific area, being from mail to different aspects, right? All sorts of
even
people.
the side research, okay, that don't seem related to the stuff, but
absolutely. Okay. And then they bring that general knowledge to help the world at large, but as well bring knowledge forward, and that knowledge is reused in product. Cisco AMP, etc. He's heavily using that knowledge in every day, right? The current malware threats, etc. That knowledge is brought through partially, at least through Talos. Yeah.
So it's literally at every level, right? Security. There's watching the internet. There's internal incident response. There's helping customer with their processes. There's at the network device, every level.
Absolutely, you can't escape it. Well, you should at least. You should. So yeah.
Is it correct to think that nowadays, anytime there's at least that's what it should be, anytime there's a IT project, there should be a security, well, regardless of what the project is, there should be a security chapter to it?
Yes, they should. Absolutely, they should. Just as much as logging, for me, it's my main battle. Is if you deploy something, if you run something, you have to have good logs, and security start by having good logs. So if you're just starting there, you can't just forget about it and not log, or log for 10 minutes, or logs everything at verbose for 3 minutes of operation, which is unfortunately what we see in a lot of environment, because nobody really spent some time to look at it. But security is actually a secure practice and secure operation, right? Don't deploy stuff with Cisco 123 and on a publicly facing with no ACL and with no logs. It sounds obvious, but you wouldn't imagine.
And this takes us to a Splunk commercial who's sponsoring this episode. But yeah, exactly. I see it like too many network designs and places where there's no logging, and whenever there's no problem, it's already impacting. But as soon as you have a problem, you're like, hey, where are the logs? There's none. Absolutely. And then you literally cannot do anything. So
For me, the great operation team is really the people that deploy a solution, monitor it, and they are the one calling CSERT when they find something strange. Hey, we had all those attempts, or this user connected, and he shouldn't, because I know he shouldn't connect from there, right? Or Paul connected, but he's on PTO. So these are the guys that operate. How can a security team or detection know that Paul is on PTO and shouldn't connect from there?
They're the real
That's the
heroes,
best detection.
because for every stuff they report, you think like how many other networks and companies, the same would have happened and no one would have seen anything. So,
Absolutely.
those guys.
Absolutely. When people operate stuff, they should own it.
It reminds me a guy from a much smaller company recently who said he had a simple alert that whenever one of his domain admins was using the root account or changing his password, I think he had an email alert, which is like a very basic, simple stuff, but it's already helping, right? Because he's the manager, the director, and at any time one of his admins changed the password, he can give them a call and say, "Hey, did you change your password? Is that normal?" And it sounds like not much, but it actually goes a long way. So just to say the smaller,
Absolutely.
even the smallest step, actually, they do help. Having a
Absolutely.
sanity check
The
every-
lowest tech, simplest stuff can be your life saving, because you're gonna really detect something when it happens versus not knowing it, which is way worse.
And employee training as well, right? Because sometimes you have like anyone, a receptionist or whoever says, "Hey, I've seen this. Is this normal?" And then through
Yes.
the help desk, it can escalate and like, "Yeah, this is not normal. Thank you." But if no one
Absolutely.
reports anything, then nothing happens.
And we get a lot of those, which is good. A lot of people are reporting us stuff, a bunch of things. So
that's where you have your daily fun, right? The smaller
I guess.
incidents, they're very
Absolutely.
fun.
Absolutely. I found this strange device connected behind a TV there. Well, yeah, it's a very good thing to report to us. So yeah, all sort of those.
A lot of times it's just an employee who wanted to have something easier and it's not an attack, but
a vast majority of the time it is yes.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it is because you discover a malware that didn't work on an internal lab. Then you say, well, how did it landed there, right? And then there's the whole puzzle of how did it landed there. It did have zero effect, but it should never reach that place in the network, right? It's all about pulling that thread and figuring out how it was, how it happened.
And it's also probably thanks to all those small everyday incidents that you also, improve your security, I guess, because
Absolutely.
you discover a random stupid device connected somewhere, and then you contact the guy. Oh, sorry, it's a mistake. I was just playing around, blah blah blah. But it's like, okay, this should have never happened. And how can we?
It should not have worked. Yeah, absolutely. The device should not have been able
like
to have an actual connection. So
it's a natural red team, right? Your employees doing random stuff. It's
absolutely,
it's
they
like
do.
a red team.
And
They
things
find-
improve, right? Yeah, things improve. I mean, you know it, right? Before you could connect your PC, any PC to the corporate network. No, you can't. Those things evolve with time as well.
And it's a double opportunity. You can educate them, so you have better employee training, and then you also fix your security because it should have not happened and stuff like that.
Well, you take it very positively. I'm telling you, not everybody's taking that that positively every time.
Yes, people don't like when they're told they cannot do stuff. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we don't want to abuse your time. Thanks a lot for coming, Jeff. It was really interesting.
Cool.
Thanks, Jeff. It was great.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast. You can subscribe to us on Cisco Podcast Network and SoundCloud or in your favorite podcasting app. You can also find us on X at Cisco Tech Story without S. Thanks again for listening and speak to you next month.
Jeff the Guardian stands tall in the night, battling shadows with all of his might, against the hacks and breaches of the day, keeping Cisco safe in every way. Known to the world as the Cyber Knight, protecting passwords like treasures in sight. Hackers do quake and they all hesitate. When Jeff's on duty, they know their fate. Jeff the Guardian, oh Jeff the Guard, keeping our secrets ain't ever too hard. With a keyboard, sword, and a firewall shield, hackers retreat, they have to yield. From employees who click on links so blind to data leaks that he can always find. No threat too big or small for his spree. Jeff is the man keeping us hack-free. On an 8-bit landscape he roams each byte, finding the glitches and setting them right. With wisdom and tech skills to outsmart, Jeff the Guardian wins mind and heart. Known to wait, known to the world as the Cyber Knight, protecting passwords like treasures inside. Hackers do quake and they all hesitate. When Jeff's on duty they know their fate. Jeff the Guardian, oh Jeff the Guard, keeping our secrets ain't ever too hard. With a keyboard sword and a firewall shield, hackers retreat, they have to yield.